My cheating father faked my mom's death until her shocking revenge exposed his 20-year secret. Just a few weeks ago, my mother was still healthy, laughing brightly in the backyard garden. Then, one morning, I received a call from the hospital. My mother had passed away due to sudden cardiac arrest. The funeral took place in the rain, and my father, he didn't show up. As they lowered the coffin into the grave, he was in Hawaii, hand in hand with his young mistress, smiling for the camera. I stood silently before my mother's grave, trying to convince myself that it was all over. But that night, my phone lit up. A message came from my mother's number. "I'm not dead. Come to the grave now." I froze. Without thinking, I rushed out into the rain, my heart pounding as if it would burst. The cemetery was silent, the flickering streetlights reflecting off my mother's tombstone. Then, through the misty white fog, I saw a figure standing before her grave. "Hello, my name is Oliver Harris. I'm 33 years old, living in Portland, Oregon, where gentle rains fall and the Willamette River flows as calmly as a lullaby. From the outside, my life might seem like a perfect picture. I work as an architect for a prestigious urban design firm. I have a wonderful wife named Audrey, a psychologist with a smile that melts away all worries, and a 5-year-old son, Nathan, with bright eyes and endless questions. We live in a modern wooden house nestled by the river, where the morning sunlight filters through large glass windows, casting a warm golden glow over the breakfast table. Every day I wake up, brew coffee, listen to Audrey's giggles with Nathan in the kitchen, and think to myself that I'm truly fortunate. But, no picture is ever truly perfect, no matter how carefully it's painted. Behind the brilliance of happy days, there are always shadows people avoid looking into, and my shadow perhaps begins with my extended family, my father and my mother. My father, Leonard Harris, is a big name in Portland's real estate world. At 65, he still runs Harris Capital, a renowned real estate investment company with projects spanning from Oregon to California. He's a polished man, always dressed in perfectly tailored suits, his voice calm but sharp, as if every word he speaks is carefully calculated. To outsiders, he's an icon of success, but to me, he's a stone wall, cold, unapproachable, and always making me feel like I'm never good enough. I remember once, when I was 25, I won my first design award. Excitedly, I showed it to my father. He glanced at the certificate and said in an even tone, "Good job, Oliver. But working for someone else is just working for someone else." Those words cut like a knife, though I was used to him downplaying my achievements. To him, I was always just an architect working for someone else, not the heir to his real estate empire. He wanted me to take over Harris Capital, but I refused. I didn't want to live in his shadow or become another version of Leonard Harris. My mother, Eleanor, was the complete opposite. At 62, she still retained the gentle and refined air of an art teacher. She had retired a few years ago, but still spent her time painting and tending to the backyard garden. Every weekend, Audrey and I would bring Nathan to visit my parents. Those afternoons were always my favorite. Mom would take Nathan to the garden, teaching him how to plant wild daisies, while I fixed bookshelves or checked the plumbing for her. My father was often busy with work, so he rarely joined us. In those moments, Mom would look at me, smile, and say, "You're my pride, Oliver, no matter what your father says. I know you've chosen the right path." Mom was always the mediator, trying to ease the tension between my father and me. I still remember the times when my father would get angry because I didn't follow his wishes. Mom would gently pull me aside, hand me a cup of tea, and tell me stories about her youth. Days when she was a passionate teacher, showing her students how to find beauty in the simplest things. She was my light, the one who made me believe I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, not even my father. My life went on like that, balanced precariously between happy days with Audrey and Nathan and the shadows of my strained relationship with my father. I tried not to think too much about him, his cutting words or disappointed looks. I told myself I had everything: a warm little family, meaningful work, and a mother who loved me unconditionally. But deep down I knew this peace was as fragile as a pane of glass, where a single crack could shatter it all. That morning started like any other. I went to the office early, preparing for an important meeting with the design team. We were discussing adjustments to the blueprints for a green urban project, and I was excited to present my idea for a central park, lined with shaded pathways. My colleague, Helena, nodded in approval, and my boss, Mr. Daniels, laughed loudly. "Oliver, you're always trying to turn Portland into a forest, aren't you?" I laughed back, feeling at ease with the relaxed atmosphere in the meeting room. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw an unknown number. Normally, I don't answer calls during meetings, but something about the persistent ringing gave me a bad feeling. I apologized to the team, stepped into the hallway, and picked up. "Hello, is this Mr. Oliver Harris?" The voice on the other end was a woman's, trembling as if she were trying to stay calm. "I'm a nurse from Portland General Hospital. I'm so sorry to inform you that your mother, Mrs. Eleanor Harris, passed away this morning. She suffered a sudden cardiac arrest. We did everything we could, but..." I didn't hear the rest of her words. Her voice faded into a distant, distorted hum, as if I were sinking underwater. My heart pounded, blood rushed to my ears, and I felt the world collapse in an instant. "No," I whispered, my voice breaking. "No, you're mistaken. My mother can't..." I stopped, realizing I was talking to myself. The nurse was still repeating her apologies, but I couldn't hear her anymore. "You're saying my mother died of a heart attack?" I asked again, my voice trembling, as if asking enough times would change the answer. "How is that possible? My mother was healthy. She had no history of heart problems." "Are you sure it's my mother, Eleanor Harris?" "Yes, sir," the nurse replied, her voice softening. "I'm so sorry. Can you come to the hospital now? We need you to complete some paperwork." I nodded, though I knew she couldn't see me. I hung up, standing frozen in the hallway, still clutching the phone. Everything around me, the laughter from the meeting room, the sunlight streaming through the window, the sound of traffic outside, felt alien, as if I were trapped in a terrible dream. I don't remember how I went back to the meeting room to excuse myself or what I said to Helena or Mr. Daniels. All I know is that I rushed out of the building, got in my car, and drove in a daze. Rain began to fall, droplets streaking down the windshield, as if the sky itself were crying with me. In my mind, one question kept repeating. How could my mother be gone like that? How could someone so full of life vanish in a single moment? I pressed the gas pedal, and the car sped through the familiar streets of Portland, but everything suddenly felt alien. The rain grew heavier, casting a gray veil over the city. The windshield wipers screeched rhythmically like a heartbeat trying to anchor me to reality, but my mind was lost. I couldn't accept it. My mother, the woman with a gentle smile, hands always stained with garden soil, and a voice as warm as sunlight, couldn't be gone like that, not from some senseless heart attack. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to stay calm, but my chest felt crushed under a heavy stone. My breathing came in short, ragged gasps, and I felt like I was falling into a bottomless abyss. I wanted to scream, to slam my hands against something. But all I could do was drive, as if keeping the car in its lane would somehow help me control the chaos raging inside. But it didn't help. Nothing could. Then memories flooded back, like scenes from an old film playing in slow motion. I saw myself, a 10-year-old boy, sitting at the kitchen table in my parents' old house. My mother stood there, wearing a floral apron, holding a paintbrush and a large sheet of paper. "Oh, look at this," she said, her voice soft as a breeze. "Every line tells a story. You don't need to draw perfectly, just draw with your heart." I would sit for hours, scribbling houses and trees, and she was always there smiling, praising my clumsy sketches. Those afternoons were where I found my love for architecture, for creating spaces people could call home. But not all memories were warm. I remembered the times my father walked in, his cold eyes scanning my drawings. "What's the point of all this doodling, Eleanor?" he'd say, his voice flat but dripping with disdain. "He needs to learn to work seriously, not daydream like you." My mother would stay silent, only squeezing my hand tighter, as if to tell me I didn't need to prove anything to him. But his words cut into me, leaving small scars that never fully healed. Back in the present, the rain outside grew heavier, as if trying to swallow the car whole. I grabbed my phone and dialed my father's number, hoping he could explain something, anything. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, but no one answered. I called again and again, each unanswered ring stabbing into my chest like a knife. Why wasn't he picking up? Where was he? Did he even know that Mom had... I couldn't bear to finish the thought. A bad feeling stirred, like a dark cloud looming in my mind. My father was always in control of his business, his family, even other people's emotions. Could he know something I didn't? The drive to Portland General Hospital felt endless. The rain blurred the windshield, and I forced myself to focus to keep from veering off the road. When I parked in front of the hospital, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the car door. I stepped out, rain soaking my coat, but I didn't care. I ran into the main lobby, my breath ragged, my heart pounding wildly. The receptionist looked at me as if she'd been expecting me. "Mr. Harris, this way, please." I was led down a long corridor, the sharp smell of antiseptic making me nauseous. At the end of the hall, I saw my father, Leonard Harris, in a perfectly tailored gray suit, talking to a doctor. He looked calm, too calm, as if he were discussing a real estate deal, not the death of his wife. I approached, my voice breaking. "Dad, what's going on? Is she really—" My father turned, his eyes cold as stone. "Oliver, you're here. The doctor was just explaining. Your mother had a heart attack, a stroke. They couldn't save her." His voice was steady, not a trace of a tremor, not a hint of grief. I stared at him, searching for any sign of loss, but all I saw was an impassive wall. The doctor, a middle-aged man with thin-framed glasses, spoke up. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Harris. Mrs. Eleanor Harris was brought here this morning, but her heart had stopped before we could intervene. There were no warning signs. It was a sudden stroke." "Sudden?" I nearly shouted, startling both the doctor and my father. My mother had no history of heart problems. Just a few weeks ago, she was playing with my son, planting flowers, laughing. How could she— Who brought her here? What happened? My father cut me off, his voice sharp. "That's enough, Oliver. Don't make a scene. Your mother is gone. Now we need to handle the paperwork and maintain the family's dignity. Understood?" He emphasized the word dignity, as if that were the only thing that mattered now. I stood there, stunned. Dignity? My mother had just died, and he was worried about dignity. I wanted to scream, to grab him and demand answers, but I couldn't. A nurse approached, handing me a bag of my mother's personal belongings, a small wallet, the pearl earrings she loved, and a handkerchief embroidered with daisies. I clutched the handkerchief, feeling like my heart was being crushed. The faint scent of her perfume lingered on the fabric, as if she were still somewhere close by. My father turned away, pulling out his phone and stepping into the hallway to speak with someone. I watched his back, a chill running down my spine. Something wasn't right. He was too calm, too detached. The woman he'd lived with for over 30 years was gone, yet there he stood, signing papers, making calls, as if it were just another day at the office. I sank into a chair in the waiting room, my mother's belongings still in my lap. The hospital corridor was cold, the sound of footsteps and nurses' conversations echoing like they came from another world. I looked down at the handkerchief, my fingers tracing the embroidered daisies. In my mind, images of my mother's radiant smile mixed with my father's cold stare. The bad feeling grew stronger, like an undercurrent pulling me under. My mother's death wasn't simple. I didn't know why, but I felt it deep in my bones. 3 days later, I stood before the cemetery on the outskirts of Portland, where the gray sky seemed ready to swallow everything whole. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy and damp, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath to bid my mother farewell. I had taken care of everything for the funeral, from choosing the coffin and arranging flowers to organizing the ceremony. My father didn't help at all. He called the night before, his voice curt and cold. "I'm tied up with some paperwork for the estate. Can you handle it?" I clenched my teeth and replied, "Yes." Inside, I wanted to scream and ask how he could be so heartless. My mother was his wife, the woman who stood by him for over 30 years, yet he used paperwork as an excuse to stay away. I stood at the cemetery gate, greeting relatives and my mother's old friends. They came, hugged me, and offered condolences I couldn't fully process. Eleanor was a wonderful woman. She left us too suddenly. We'll miss her smile. Each word felt like a knife, reminding me that my mother was truly gone. But what stung my heart even more were the whispers behind my back. "Where's Leonard? Why isn't he here?" It's strange, a husband not attending his wife's funeral. I heard them but kept my head down, trying to maintain the family's dignity as my father had demanded. I didn't want them to see our family as a broken drama. Audrey stood by my side, her hand gripping mine tightly. She didn't say much, just squeezed gently enough to let me know she was there, my anchor in this storm. Nathan, my little son, dressed in a black suit too big for him, looked around in confusion. "Daddy, where's Grandma?" he asked, his voice clear but full of uncertainty. I knelt down, pulled him into my arms, and fought back tears. Grandma's in a beautiful place now, buddy. She's planting daisies in heaven. Nathan nodded, but I knew he didn't understand. How could a 5-year-old comprehend such a loss? When my mother's coffin was brought out, my legs felt like they'd turned to stone. The oak casket was covered in white daisies, her favorite flower. I walked behind it, each step heavy, as if I were treading a path with no destination. The people around me bowed their heads, some sobbing loudly, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. As the coffin was lowered into the grave, I couldn't hold back anymore. Tears spilled over, hot and streaming down my cheeks. I missed her. Her departure was too sudden, too senseless, like a book torn apart mid-story. Audrey wrapped her arms around me, whispering, "You're not alone, Oliver. I'm here. Nathan's here." I nodded, but inside I felt hollow. I wanted to scream, to demand why my mother had to go, why no one could give me an explanation. But I just stood there, watching as shovelfuls of earth covered the coffin, as if burying a part of my life along with it. My father didn't show up. Not a call, not a text, not a single word of concern. I had hoped, even just a little, that he'd appear at the last moment, that he'd stand here, even if he didn't cry, just to maintain the facade of a grieving husband. But no, Leonard Harris chose to be absent on the day my mother was laid to rest. His absence was like a slap in the face, a betrayal of everything my mother had sacrificed for this family. When the funeral ended, Audrey and I took Nathan home. Our wooden house by the Willamette River, once filled with laughter, now felt suffocatingly silent. Audrey made me a cup of tea. "Are you okay?" she asked, her eyes full of worry. I shook my head, unable to speak. I picked up my phone, scrolling aimlessly, searching for something to hold on to. Then I opened my father's social media page, something I rarely did. His posts were usually just photos of real estate projects, wine-tasting events, or cliché quotes about success. But this time, I froze. A photo appeared, showing my father in a white suit, standing next to a young woman far too young, maybe in her 30s. They stood on a balcony, smiling brightly, wine glasses sparkling under the lights. The caption was short but cut like a knife, a new chapter in life. I felt the blood rush to my head, my breath catching in my throat. My mother had been buried just hours ago, and my father, her husband, was publicly flaunting a new chapter with a stranger. I gripped the phone, wanting to smash it on the floor, to scream, to confront him right then and there. Audrey noticed the change in my expression and asked, "Oliver, what's wrong?" I handed her the phone, unable to speak. She looked at the screen, her eyes widening, then slowly lowering, as if she too couldn't believe it. The pain inside me erupted into rage, like a wildfire. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf, where I kept an old framed wedding photo of my parents. In the picture, my mother was young and radiant in her white dress, and my father, though stern, looked at her with what I once thought was love. I touched the frame, my fingers trembling. "Mom," I whispered, "what happened to you? Why is he doing this?" My gaze hardened, as if a part of my heart had turned to ice. The bad feeling was no longer a subtle undercurrent. It was a storm roaring in my chest. My mother's death wasn't random. I had no proof, no answers, but I knew, deep in my core, that the truth was being hidden. And I, Oliver Harris, would not stop until I uncovered it all. That night, after Audrey had gone to bed and the house was swallowed by darkness, I sat in the living room, holding the bag of my mother's personal belongings returned by the hospital, the small wallet, the pearl earrings, and the daisy-embroidered handkerchief. Simple items that carried the weight of her entire life. I opened the wallet, my fingers brushing over an old photo of me and Nathan that she always kept with her. Tears welled up again, but I clenched my jaw, trying to hold them back. I didn't want to cry anymore. I wanted to understand. I wanted to know why my mother was gone, why my father was acting as if she meant nothing to him. Then my phone buzzed, a sharp, cold sound that shattered the silence of the room. I glanced at the screen, and my heart seemed to stop. My mother's number appeared, unmistakable. A short message, "I'm not dead, come to my grave now." I froze, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Was this some cruel joke? A system error? My mother was dead. I had seen her coffin lowered into the grave, felt the cold earth cover her life. So where did this message come from? I stared at the screen, as if it would give me answers. Then, with shaking hands, I called the number back. The phone rang once, twice, then cut off abruptly, as if someone on the other end didn't want to answer. I called again and again, but only silence responded. A powerful instinct surged within me, like a fire igniting in my chest. I stopped thinking. I jumped up, grabbed a flashlight from the drawer, threw on a raincoat, and rushed out the door. Audrey was still asleep, and I didn't want to wake her. I didn't know what I was doing, only that I had to get to the cemetery. I had to find the truth. The car sped through the night, light rain falling, blurring the windshield. The road to the cemetery on the outskirts of Portland was pitch black, lit only by the weak glow of my headlights. I gripped the steering wheel, my heart pounding as if it might burst through my chest. The cemetery loomed before me, cold and eerie. Rows of tombstones faded into the dim light, like silent specters. I parked the car and stepped out, the rain soaking through my coat, chilling my skin. The flashlight in my hand illuminated the dirt path leading to my mother's grave. Each step felt like it carried 1,000 pounds. But I couldn't stop. I had to know. I had to see. As I approached the grave, I froze. A figure stood there, a few meters away, right in front of the freshly covered tombstone. A frail, trembling silhouette, but achingly familiar. I aimed the flashlight and the beam lit up her face, my mother. It was her, thinner, her hair matted from the rain, but her eyes still bright, still warm, still my mother. I stood rooted to the spot, unable to breathe, unable to believe my eyes. This couldn't be real. My mother was dead. I had buried her. "All," she whispered, her voice faint but clear. Then she broke into sobs, her frail shoulders trembling. I rushed forward, wrapping her in my arms, tears streaming uncontrollably. She felt so real it was overwhelming. The warmth of her body, the faint scent of her perfume, the embrace I thought I'd lost forever. I trembled, crying and holding her tightly, terrified that if I let go, she'd vanish like a dream. "Mom, Mom," I could only repeat, my voice breaking. How are you alive?" She took my hand, her fingers cold but firm. She looked into my eyes, her gaze a mix of pain and resolve. "You can't tell anyone I'm alive," she whispered, her voice trembling as if afraid someone might overhear. "I'll explain everything to you, Oliver. I had a reason to fake my death. I was stunned, 1,000 questions flooding my mind. A plan? Who helped her do this? Why did she have to fake her death? And why did she choose me, trusting me with this message? I wanted to ask, to understand, but no words came out. The rain continued to fall, light and cold, cloaking us in a thin veil of mist. We stood there beside her freshly covered grave in the dark cemetery, like two lost ghosts in a surreal story. Fear and mystery enveloped me, but in that moment, I knew one thing: my mother was alive. Suddenly, my mother grabbed my hand, pulling me away from the dim glow of the flashlight. "It's not safe here," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "Follow me, Oliver, we need to talk." I nodded, my mind still reeling, and followed her through the rows of tombstones, down a narrow path leading out of the cemetery. The rain soaked through my coat, but I didn't feel the cold. The only feelings coursing through me were shock, mingled with joy and an unnamed fear. She led me to an old car parked at the corner of the road, a faded silver sedan that didn't resemble any vehicle our family owned. She opened the door and gestured for me to get in. I hesitated, staring at her, still unable to believe she was standing before me, flesh and blood. "Mom, are you sure you're okay?" I asked, my voice faltering. She only nodded, her eyes a mix of tenderness and tension. "Get in, son. I'll explain." We drove off into the night, my mother behind the wheel, while I sat beside her, still clutching the daisy-embroidered handkerchief. The house she took me to was tucked away in a corner of Portland's outskirts, hidden behind rows of old oak trees. It was a small, weathered house with a chipped tile roof and windows covered with heavy curtains. My mother turned off the engine, scanned the surroundings, as if afraid someone was watching, then led me inside. The interior was sparse, almost empty, a wooden table, a few chairs, and a fold-out bed in the corner. It was nothing like the luxurious mansion she had shared with my father. She poured me a glass of water, but I didn't drink. I sat down, looking at her, waiting. She sat across from me, her thin hands clasped tightly together, as if trying to keep herself from falling apart. "I know you're angry," she began, her voice soft but heavy. "Angry that I hid this from you, that I let you endure the pain of losing me. But you have to understand, Oliver, I had no other choice." I shook my head, trying to suppress the surge of emotions. "Mom, why? Why did you have to do this? Why did you have to fake your death? And Dad, does he have anything to do with this?" Just mentioning my father made my blood boil. The image of him with the young woman in the social media photo cut into my heart like a knife. My mother took a deep breath, her eyes darkening, as if she were sifting through painful memories. "It started a few months ago," she said. "Your father, he changed, Oliver. He became colder, more ruthless. I discovered he was having an affair with a young woman, someone named Vanessa, who works at his company. He wasn't just sneaking around, he was blatant about it, as if he wanted to humiliate me." I clenched my fists, trying not to interrupt. I had suspected as much after seeing that photo, but hearing her confirm it felt like a punch to the chest. She continued, her voice trembling with anger and pain. "When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. Instead, he threatened me. He wanted me to sign over assets, shares in the company, properties, everything in my name. He said if I didn't agree, I'd disappear." "Disappear?" I repeated, my voice choking. "You mean Dad threatened to kill you?" She nodded, her eyes red with tears. "I wasn't sure if he'd actually go through with it, but I felt the danger. He started watching me, Oliver. I found hidden cameras in the bedroom, in the living room. He'd fly into rages out of nowhere, and once, he even shoved me when I refused to sign the papers. One night, he lost control, screaming that I'd regret not obeying him. That's when I knew I had to do something to protect myself." I sat in silence, feeling like the world was crumbling again. My father, the man I'd thought was merely domineering and cold, could he be this cruel? I remembered his emotionless gaze at the hospital, the way he hurriedly signed papers, as if my mother's death was just another task to check off. But she wasn't done. "I had an old friend at Portland General Hospital," she said, her voice steadier, as if recounting a carefully calculated plan. "Her name is Martha. I told her everything, and she agreed to help. I planned to fake a heart attack. The housekeeper didn't know anything, so when I collapsed, she panicked and called for help immediately. Everything went as planned. At the hospital, Martha recorded that I had gone into cardiac arrest and helped me leave through a back exit. They used a mannequin to substitute the body. Everyone, including your father, believed I was dead." I listened, my head spinning. "Mom, you planned all of this? But why didn't you tell me? Do you know how much it hurt to think you were gone?" My voice broke, torn between anger and love. I thought of the past few days, the sleepless nights, the tears at the funeral. She had let me endure it all without a single hint. She lowered her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Oliver, I wanted to tell you, but I couldn't take the risk. Your father, he's too dangerous. If he suspected even the slightest thing, I don't know what would have happened. I chose you because I knew you wouldn't abandon me, because you're the only one I trust." I looked at her, my heart torn in two. I pitied her, this woman who had to stage her own death to survive. But I was also angry. Angry at being kept in the dark, angry at my father, the man I called Dad, for pushing her to this point. The image of him in his perfect suit, with that cold smile, now felt like a threat in my eyes. I'd once thought he was just controlling, but now I saw he was far more dangerous. She gripped my hand, her eyes resolute. "I had no other choice, Oliver. Faking my death was the only way to survive and make him let his guard down. But now I need you. We have to uncover the truth before he finds out I'm still alive." I stood frozen. Each word from my mother cut through the shock, gripping me like a knife. Outside, the rain pounded relentlessly on the tin roof, mingling with the ragged breaths of my mother and me in the small suburban house. The dim yellow light cast shadows on her gaunt face, highlighting the lines of fear and resilience etched into her features. I looked at her, the woman I thought I'd lost forever, and felt a fire ignite in my chest. Pain, rage, and love for my mother fused into a cold determination. I would protect her, and I would make my father, Leonard Harris, pay for what he'd done. But I knew this wasn't the time for impulsive actions. If my mother was right, if my father was truly as dangerous as she said, we needed evidence, a solid plan. I gripped her hand tightly, my voice firm. "Mom, I'll do whatever it takes to help you, but I need to know what you want me to do. Where do we start?" She sighed, her eyes scanning the bare room as if searching for an anchor. "We need evidence, Oliver. Evidence of what he's done, not just to me, but everything he's hidden in the past. Your father is careful, but he's overconfident now. He thinks I'm dead, that no one stands in his way. This is our chance." I nodded, though my mind was still in turmoil. I wanted to scream, to confront my father right then and there, but I knew she was right. We needed to act smart, not emotional. "I'll keep this secret, Mom," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I won't tell anyone, not even Audrey or Nathan. But you have to promise me you won't disappear again. I couldn't handle losing you a second time." She gave a sad smile, gently stroking my cheek, as she did when I was a child. "I promise, Oliver. From now on, I won't hide anything from you." Returning home that night, I felt like I was living in two worlds. One was the warm wooden house by the Willamette River, where Audrey and Nathan slept peacefully, where I once thought everything was perfect. The other was a dark storm, where my mother had to fake her death to survive, where my father, the man I called Dad, might be far more ruthless than I ever imagined. I slipped into the house quietly, careful not to wake Audrey. She lay in bed, her breathing steady, but I couldn't join her. I sat in the living room, staring at the framed photo of my mother on the small altar, wondering how I could keep this secret from the wife I loved more than anything. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I brewed coffee, made toast for Nathan, and drove him to preschool. Audrey looked at me, her eyes full of concern. "Are you okay, Oliver?" she asked, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "You look like you haven't slept all night." I forced a smile, trying to hide the tension. "I'm fine, honey, it's just, I'm still not used to Mom being gone." Audrey hugged me, and I felt a pang of guilt for not telling her the truth. But I had promised my mother, and I couldn't take the risk. Not because I didn't trust Audrey, but because I feared any small mistake could put my mother in danger. Meanwhile, my mother stayed hidden in the suburban house, contacting me only through an encrypted phone provided by an old friend. Each time I received a message from her, my heart raced, as if I were living in a spy thriller. "Don't call directly," she instructed. "Only text when necessary. And be careful, Oliver, your father isn't easily fooled." While my mother lived like a ghost, my father, Leonard Harris, was reveling in a lavish lifestyle. I checked his social media, and each post stabbed my heart anew. There he was, on a yacht in California, arm around the young woman named Vanessa, smiling as if he'd never lost his wife of 30 years. Another post from Vegas, with a glass of wine and a caption, "Freedom is living true to yourself." I gripped the phone, wanting to smash it, but I knew I had to stay calm. My father was overconfident, as my mother said. That was our advantage. I decided to use his absence to act. The family mansion where I grew up, where my mother once tended her daisy garden, became my target. I knew my father had a private study where he kept important documents. If there was any evidence of what he'd done to my mother, it would be there one evening after Audrey and Nathan were asleep. I drove to the mansion. The night was pitch black, with only faint streetlights illuminating the road leading to the house. I still had a key but didn't want to turn on any lights or draw attention. I stepped inside, my heart pounding, feeling like a thief in my own childhood home. My father's study was on the second floor, behind a heavy oak door with an electronic lock. Fortunately, I knew the code, my mother's birthday, a detail that now felt both bitter and ironic. Inside, the room was as I remembered, a large wooden desk, shelves filled with file binders, and the faint smell of leather. I began searching, careful not to disturb anything. The drawers were full of contracts, invoices, and routine business documents. But I knew my father wasn't that simple. He always hid important things where no one would think to look. After nearly an hour of searching, I noticed a panel on the wall behind the desk that seemed out of place. I tapped it lightly and heard a hollow sound. My heart raced. Using a letter opener from the desk, I carefully pried the panel open. Behind it was a small old safe with a combination lock. I tried several combinations, my father's birthday, my mother's, mine, but none worked. Finally, I tried their wedding anniversary, and the safe opened with a dry click. Inside was a treasure trove of dark secrets. I found bank statements showing massive transfers to offshore accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands, places I'd only heard of in financial scandals. There were forged contracts with my mother's signature, transferring shares and properties I knew she'd never agreed to. But what chilled me to the bone was a small USB drive, an old stack of newspapers, and a few cassette tapes. I plugged the USB into my laptop, my hands trembling. An audio file appeared, recorded over 20 years ago. I pressed play, and my father's voice came through, harsh and filled with anger. "You think you can control me forever, Charles," he shouted. "This fortune belongs to me, not you or your daughter." The responding voice was my grandfather's, Charles, calm but firm. "Leonard, you won't touch a cent unless Eleanor agrees. You know that." The argument escalated, with my father's threats growing darker, until the recording cut off abruptly. I opened the stack of newspapers, my heart pounding. They were local papers from over 20 years ago, with headlines about a car accident that killed my grandparents. I remembered my mother telling me, her voice heavy with grief, that they died during a business trip. At the time, I thought it was a random tragedy. But now, piecing together the recording, my father's resentful tone, and the timing of the accident just days later, I began to suspect. Was my father directly involved? Did he do something to seize my mother's inheritance? I photographed everything, backing up the data to my phone and a spare hard drive. Then I drove back to the suburban house, my heart heavy. When I told my mother, she sat silently, her trembling hands clutching her glass of water. "I always suspected," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I always felt my parents' deaths weren't normal, but I had no proof, and I couldn't bring myself to believe Leonard could go that far." I took her hand, feeling the world crumble again. "Mom, we're not just dealing with a cheating husband," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "We're dealing with someone who might have been hiding crimes for 20 years. She nodded, her eyes no longer just filled with sorrow but burning with resolve. "We'll expose him, Oliver, for me, for you, and for everyone he's hurt." I looked at my mother, a woman who had endured so much, and felt a fire ignite in my chest. It wasn't the blind rage of anger, but a cold, sharpened determination, like a blade honed to perfection. My father, Leonard Harris, had built an empire on lies, betrayal, and possibly crimes I hadn't dared to imagine. But now he would face the truth, and my mother and I would be the ones to pull back the curtain. I gripped her hand, my voice resolute. "Mom, we'll do this the right way. No impulsiveness, no letting emotions take over. We need to build a solid case, so when he falls, he won't get back up." She gave a faint but steadfast smile. "You're truly my son, Oliver. Always thorough, always thinking before acting. I know someone who can help us. Charlotte Wells, a lawyer specializing in finance and estates. She was my best friend in college. If anyone knows how to deal with men like your father, it's Charlotte." I nodded, feeling a spark of hope in the darkness. "So, where do we start, Mom? The documents I found, the bank statements, forged contracts, the recording. Are they enough to begin?" "They're enough to start," she said, her eyes lighting up. "But we need more. Your father is careful. He won't let himself be caught easily. We need additional evidence, and we need to do everything legally, so when the truth comes out, he can't escape." The days that followed felt like I was living two lives. By day, I was still Oliver Harris, architect, husband, father, dropping Nathan off at preschool, laughing with Audrey, and working on blueprints at Urban Vision. But by night, I became someone else, a truth seeker, quietly piecing together the puzzle to dismantle my father's empire. Meanwhile, my father seemed utterly unaware. I monitored him through social media, where he continued to post about his lavish lifestyle, standing on a yacht in Malibu, dining by candlelight in an upscale restaurant, or strolling on a beach with Vanessa. Each photo was a stab to my heart, but also an opportunity. He was overconfident, believing he'd escaped all constraints, that my mother was dead and no one could stand in his way. He didn't know his every move was being watched, that each smug smile only fueled my determination. I began to act. First, I contacted Charlotte Wells, my mother's lawyer friend. We met at a small cafe on the outskirts of Portland, where no one knew me. Charlotte was a woman in her 50s with short silver hair and eyes as sharp as a hawk's. As I recounted my mother's story, the faked death, my father's threats, and the documents I'd found, she listened intently, taking notes without betraying any emotion. When I handed her copies of the bank statements, forged contracts, and the recording, she finally spoke. "This is a big case. Leonard Harris isn't just an adulterer. If what you're saying is true, he could be running an illegal financial network, but we need more evidence, and we need to do this by the book." Charlotte began organizing the documents, turning my scattered pieces into a coherent internal investigation file. She categorized the bank statements, scrutinized the forged contracts, and hired an audio expert to verify the recording. "This recording is crucial," she said. "It shows Leonard's intent, but we need to tie it to specific actions. Can you get more data from his company?" I knew it was a dangerous task, but I nodded. Harris Capital, my father's company, was a fortress with tight security and loyal staff, but I had an advantage. I was Leonard Harris's son. Though he never saw me as his heir, I still had limited access to some company systems from helping with design projects in the past. One evening, I went to Harris Capital's headquarters, pretending to retrieve old design documents. The security guard, a middle-aged man named Frank, greeted me warmly. "Haven't seen you in a while, Oliver," he said, his tone friendly. I smiled, hiding my tension. "Yeah, I just need to grab some blueprints. Dad asked me to check an old project." Frank let me in without suspicion. I went straight to the 10th floor, where my father's office was. The room was expansive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Portland, but I had no time to admire the view. I sat at his desk, powered on his computer, and used a backup password I'd seen him enter during a family meeting. Luckily, it still worked. I sifted through files, my heart pounding with every sound in the hallway. Then I found a hidden folder, encrypted with another password. I tried several combinations to no avail. Finally, I typed Vanessa, and the folder unlocked. Inside were countless emails, invoices, and records of anonymous offshore investment funds. My eyes lit up. This was gold. I copied everything to a USB drive, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. This was evidence of under-the-table transactions, money that never appeared in Harris Capital's official books. Meanwhile, my mother worked from her end. She secretly contacted an old friend in the tax authority, a man named Robert, who had worked under my grandfather. She sent him copies of the documents I'd found. A few days later, Robert called back, his voice grave. "Eleanor, what you sent me is a bombshell. Leonard has 4 offshore accounts totaling over $30 million, unreported. This is clear evidence of money laundering and tax evasion. I'll pass this to federal agencies, but you and Oliver need to be careful. If Leonard finds out what you're doing, he won't hold back." Charlotte accelerated the process. She filed an anonymous complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission and the IRS while initiating a temporary asset freeze on Leonard. "He won't know what's happening until it's too late," she said, her eyes gleaming like a warrior preparing for battle. "We're planting a legal bomb under his feet, and it's about to go off." In the meantime, I decided to stir things up on social media. Using an anonymous account, I began leaking hints about Harris Capital, vague suggestions of investment fraud, questions about the origins of Leonard Harris's wealth. I didn't directly accuse him, letting the press and public dig deeper. Soon, articles started appearing. Is Harris Capital hiding something? Questions surrounding the transparency of a real estate empire. Shareholders grew uneasy. The company's stock dipped slightly, and I knew my father was starting to feel the pressure. One morning, I received a message from Charlotte. "The FBI has launched a federal investigation. They're reviewing all the documents we sent. Leonard doesn't know yet, but he'll be summoned soon." I sank into a chair, gripping my phone, and whispered to myself, now he'll know what it feels like to lose control. Meanwhile, my father continued his vacation. I saw his latest post, a photo of him on a beach, cocktail in hand, but I also saw other news. Reporters were starting to swarm him, asking questions about Harris Capital offshore accounts and fraud allegations. He still smiled, brushing off the questions, but I knew that smile masked panic. He was losing control, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I held the upper hand. I called my mother, my voice trembling with excitement and anxiety. "Mom, everything's falling into place. The FBI is involved. He won't get away." She was silent for a moment, then spoke, her voice both resolute and pained. "Good, Oliver. But remember, this isn't about revenge. This is about justice. For me, for your grandparents, and for everything he's destroyed." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. Justice. The word echoed in my mind, a guiding flame. The days that followed saw the legal storm we had quietly planted finally erupt. One morning, I turned on the TV and saw my father's face on the local news. Leonard Harris, chairman of Harris Capital, accused of investment fraud and money laundering. The anchor's voice rang out, cold and sharp. Major newspapers echoed the story. Real estate empire collapses, the dark secrets of Leonard Harris. I sat silently on the sofa, clutching my coffee mug, feeling both relief and tension. Harris Capital plunged into crisis. My father's bank accounts were frozen, and his strategic partners, those who once clapped him on the back at lavish parties, swiftly withdrew their investments and canceled contracts. The company's stock plummeted, and social media was flooded with critical posts and angry comments from shareholders and clients. My father, the man who always controlled everything, was now cornered like a beast backed against a wall. I imagined him somewhere, perhaps in a luxury hotel in the Bahamas, reading the headlines and realizing his empire was crumbling piece by piece. I received a message from Charlotte. Leonard has returned to Portland. He's trying to contact lawyers, but no one will take his case. The FBI is about to issue an arrest warrant. Be ready, Oliver. This will be over soon. My heart pounded as I read the message. Over. The words sounded both sweet and terrifying. I wanted my father to pay, but I couldn't deny that he had once been my father. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was him. I stared at his name on the screen, feeling as if my heart stopped. I answered, my voice cold. Dad. Oliver. His voice was hoarse, lacking its usual measured calm. Have you seen the news? It's all lies. They're trying to ruin me. You have to help me, Oliver. I listened to him, each word like a knife. He didn't ask about Mom, didn't mention her death, didn't show a shred of remorse, just the panic of a man losing everything. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. Dad, I'm not sure what I can do, but if you want, we can meet and talk face to face at the mansion tonight. He was silent for a moment, then agreed, his voice thick with suspicion. Fine, 8 o'clock. Don't let me down, Oliver. I hung up, my hands trembling. This was the opportunity. Not just to confront him, but to show him the truth, that Mom was alive, that his crimes had been exposed. I texted my mother, tonight at the mansion. Are you ready? She replied instantly. I'm ready, Oliver, but be careful. He won't accept defeat easily. At 8 o'clock, I stood before the family mansion, the place that had once been my home, my mother's, and even my father's. The house now felt cold, a shadow of its past. I stepped inside, turned on the light, and felt like I was entering a battlefield. My father was already there, sitting in the living room, his gray suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days. A glass of whiskey sat before him, but he didn't drink, just stared into the amber liquid, as if searching for answers. Oh, he said, his voice weary. You're here, I need your help. The company is collapsing, and it's all because of jealous rivals. You have to stand by me. I stood still, looking at the man who had once been a symbol of power in my eyes. Now he seemed small, frail, like a wounded animal. But I felt no pity, only rage. Dad, I said, my voice icy, before we talk about the company, don't you have anything to say about Mom? About what you did to her? He frowned, a flicker of weariness in his eyes. Your mother is dead, Oliver, you know that. Don't drag up the past to blame me. I gave a faint, bitter smile, feeling the knife in my heart twist. Dead? Are you sure? I turned and opened the living room door, and my mother stepped in. Eleanor Harris, flesh and blood. Not a hallucination. She stood there, frail but resolute, her eyes blazing as they locked onto my father. He staggered back, the whiskey glass falling to the floor and shattering. He nearly collapsed, clutching the chair, his face pale, as if he'd seen a ghost. Eleanor, he whispered, his voice trembling. No, it's impossible, you're dead. My mother stepped forward, her voice sharp and cold. Leonard, did you think you could kill me so easily? Did you think you could take everything, my assets, my family, even my life, without paying a price? He shook his head, his eyes darting between panic and anger. What are you talking about? Is this some kind of joke? Oliver, you're behind this, aren't you? You two are conspiring to frame me. I stepped forward, standing beside my mother, my voice calm but heavy with weight. Dad, stop pretending. We know everything. The offshore accounts, the forged contracts, how you threatened Mom to seize her assets. And then there's my grandparents. Did you think their car accident would stay a secret forever? My mother continued, her voice trembling with pain. Leonard, I once loved you. I thought you were just ambitious, but you killed my parents, didn't you? For their fortune. And you planned to do the same to me. He laughed, but it was a hollow, desperate sound. You're both insane. I didn't kill anyone. It was an accident. And you, Eleanor, you think you can stage a fake death to ruin me? You have no proof. I pulled out my phone and played the audio file, the argument between him and my grandfather from over 20 years ago. His voice, filled with resentment, threatened my grandfather over the fortune. As he listened, his face paled, but he still tried to shout, That proves nothing, you're slandering me! But before he could say more, the wail of police sirens sounded outside. The door burst open, and federal agents stormed in, guns holstered, their eyes cold. An officer stepped forward, holding up an arrest warrant. Leonard Harris, you're under arrest for money laundering, investment fraud, and accessory to murder. He was handcuffed right there in the house that had once been a symbol of his power. Reporters were already waiting outside, cameras flashing, capturing the moment the man once hailed as Portland's icon of success was led away like a criminal. As he was escorted out, my father turned back, his eyes a mix of hatred and desperation. "You'll regret this, Eleanor," he growled. But my mother stood there, silent, her eyes no longer filled with pain but with the resolve of someone who had won. But that was only the beginning. The case against Leonard Harris quickly became a national media frenzy. Morning and evening news, major newspapers, and viral social media posts all focused on him. No longer the successful entrepreneur, but the mastermind of a dark financial network. The charges were laid out clearly: money laundering, investment fraud, tax evasion, and accessory to the deaths of my grandparents. My mother and I were called as key witnesses at the trial. The day we entered the courtroom, my heart pounded, not out of fear, but from the realization that this was the final moment to confront my father. The room was packed with people, reporters, lawyers, and former business partners of my father, now looking at him with unfamiliar eyes. He sat in the defendant's chair, his gray suit wrinkled, his hair noticeably whiter, his face gaunt. He didn't look at me or my mother, only stared down, his eyes empty, like a man who had lost everything. When my mother took the stand, I saw her stronger than ever. She recounted everything: the years of threats from my father, the times he pressured her to sign documents, and her suspicions about my grandparents' deaths. Her voice didn't waver, didn't falter, as if all her pain had transformed into strength. "I had to fake my death to survive," she said, looking directly at my father. "But I didn't do this for revenge. I did it to protect my son, to protect what was left of my family." My father lowered his head further, offering no response, no defense. I knew he had nothing left to say. When it was my turn, I stood and looked at my father one last time. "You once said I wasn't good enough," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "But I don't need your approval. I just need my mother to be safe and the truth to be revealed." He finally looked up, his eyes hollow, as if his soul had abandoned his body. I didn't know if he felt remorse, but I knew one thing: the man before me was no longer my father. The trial ended with a 30-year prison sentence. All of my father's assets were seized, and Harris Capital officially went bankrupt. Several senior employees were investigated for their involvement, and the dark financial network my father had built over years was completely dismantled. The press called it the biggest scandal Portland had ever seen. But for me, it wasn't just a case. It was the end of a nightmare and the beginning of a new chapter. After the trial, my mother and I became the center of attention. The media dubbed her the woman who returned from the dead, turning her story into a symbol of resilience. My mother, with her gentle but resolute nature, chose to step away from the spotlight. She sold the old mansion, the place that had once been a home but also a prison, in her final years with my father. The proceeds from the sale were donated to a foundation supporting women affected by domestic abuse and financial manipulation. "I don't need that house anymore," she told me, her voice soft. "It only reminds me of the days I lived in fear." She moved to a small house on the Oregon coast, where she lived peacefully, planting wild daisies and painting. Each time I visited, I saw her in the garden, hands covered in dirt, her smile as radiant as ever. She taught local children how to paint, sharing stories about finding beauty in simple things. Watching her, I knew she had reclaimed herself, no longer a shadow of Leonard Harris. I changed too. I left urban vision, no longer wanting to be tied to large corporations. Instead, I opened a small studio called Eleanor Designs, specializing in green spaces and community housing. My goal was simple but clear: build homes that people could return to without fear. Each project was a way to heal, not just for myself, but for others who had lived in houses full of wounds, like my mother and me. When Audrey learned the full truth about my mother and what I had done, she was speechless with shock. "Oliver, why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her eyes red with tears. I took her hand, apologized for keeping her in the dark, and explained that I didn't want to pull her into danger. She hugged me, whispering, "I'm proud of you, but don't ever hide anything from me again, okay?" I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my chest. Audrey and Nathan remained my greatest anchors. We visited my mother often. Trips to the Oregon coast became a joy for the whole family. Nathan ran through her daisy garden, laughing as she taught him how to draw a dinosaur. Audrey and my mother sat on the porch, sipping tea and chatting like old friends. Watching them, my heart warmed. This was my family, not perfect, not glamorous, but filled with love and sincerity. As time passed, the case of Leonard Harris faded into the background, but its echoes lingered deeply in my mind. Whenever I drove past the old Harris Capitol building, now just an empty concrete shell with a dusty for lease sign, I no longer felt hatred. Instead, I felt a twinge of regret, not for my father, but for the man he could have been. He had everything, a family, a career, and the chance to live a meaningful life. But he chose greed, betrayal, and ultimately lost himself. I began writing my story, not for the world to read, but for Nathan. One day when he's older, I want him to read it and understand that life isn't just about what you achieve, but how you face its challenges. And I wrote about the greatest lesson I learned. Justice isn't about retaliation, but about daring to stand up for what's right, even when it means standing against your own family. Nathan, my little son, is my brightest light. I spend more time with him, teaching him about honesty, kindness, and protecting those who are vulnerable. One day, while we were drawing in my mother's garden, Nathan looked up and asked, "Dad, is Grandma a superhero? She beat the bad guy." I laughed, ruffling his hair. "You're right, buddy. Grandma is a superhero, not because she beat the bad guy, but because she never gave up, no matter how tough life got." Those afternoons with my family, under the fiery red sunsets of the Oregon coast, taught me the true value of happiness. It doesn't lie in extravagant parties, towering skyscrapers, or the approval of others. Happiness is sitting with Audrey, listening to her talk about a patient she helped overcome their pain. It's watching Nathan run and laugh, carefree. It's looking at my mother, the woman who came back from the dead, and seeing her live true to herself. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table in my mother's seaside home, I looked into the eyes of Audrey, Nathan, and my mother. My voice was hoarse but filled with emotion as I said, "I used to think happiness was about achieving success, about being recognized by others. But after everything, I've learned happiness is living without fear and being able to hold your head high and say, 'I didn't betray my conscience.'" My mother took my hand, her eyes shining. "You've made me proud, Oliver," she said. Audrey smiled, resting her hand on my shoulder, and Nathan, with strawberry jam still on his lips, chimed in, "Dad's my superhero!" We burst into laughter, and in that moment, I knew that no matter how painful the past had been, we had found light. We had found each other,